What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking Season 1, Episode 4 of WWE Evil, the episode on the Brothers of Destruction, Undertaker and Kane. So I've been slowly but surely making my way through the show. It's been good so far, really learning nothing new, as I've said in other reviews. But this was a nice trip down memory lane. I mean, I didn't grow up in the era in which Taker and Kane were doing their whole storyline in the late 90s, but you've heard this story a million times. If you've watched any documentary on these two, have really followed the product for any length of time, you probably already know their backstory. But hearing from them on it, hearing, Taker and Kane on it, Bruce Pritchard, who was instrumental in the creation of the characters and the storyline and stuff like that, was great. Mick Foley as well, among other people and other fans. I thought was well done. So a good episode. The show is far from must-see or anything, but it's fun to watch, probably with people who aren't as familiar with the wrestling side of things, or who aren't really wrestling fans. I think they would probably find it the most enjoyable, to be honest with you. We start off the episode with Bruce Pritchard saying that WWE always really wanted a truly terrifying character, specifically for Survivor Series in 1990, and they settled on The Undertaker. Bruce thought an Undertaker, like the job, that is, not The Undertaker himself, an Undertaker would be like a cool last thing, the last thing that you would want to see before being put in the ground. And Taker himself, Mark Calloway, was told, while he was in WCW, he didn't say the name here, but he did say it on Steve Austin's podcast a couple of years ago, and he's probably said this elsewhere as well, in that it was Ole Anderson, actually, who told him that no one would ever pay money to see him wrestle. And he took that to heart, and he thought, okay, sounds good, and wanted to prove him wrong. It really motivated him. And Bruce thought he would be the perfect person for the job. And they enlisted him, and they had him play the character, and brought him in to play that character in 1990. Pritchard knew that he could do it. The Undertaker, not the person, but, again, the job. It was their duty to bury souls, sort of. And Taker kind of took that to heart, incorporated that into his character, and that led to the Undertaker that we know now today, and that created the legacy that he ended up leaving on WWE. But before we even got to his debut, Vince called him up and told him what the character was, and told him to come see him at his office in Stamford the very next day to kind of run through what he wanted out of this character. Taker talks about how it was inspired by Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees, which it was Friday the 13th actually just yesterday as we speak right now. Halloween, Michael Myers, and Freddy Krueger in Nightmare on Elm Street. Didn't want to rip them off exactly, but he took concepts from each character and made them his own, which is cool. They recap the debut at Survivor Series in 1990, and it was his goal at the character to make it as ominous as possible. Fans were mesmerized by his ominous presence, as they talked about here on the show. And he kind of compared the entrance of his to like the sea parting. People would kind of move out of his way. People would take notice as if the sea was parting just for him to make his entrance, which is cool. He thought one of the coolest things about The Undertaker was that fans didn't know where the character stopped and started and stopped, and that he would never do interviews. He was rarely ever out of character, at least during that point in time. So it was very unique compared to other characters in WWE at that point. To complete the act, they had Brother Love, a.k.a. Bruce Pritchard, with him at one point, when he first started, obviously, at Survivor Series 1990. But at a certain point, they switched over to Paul Bearer, the former Percy Pringle, who they thought would be a perfect fit for Taker's manager. And, they were put together on TV. It was a money combo. Taker went on to beat Hulk Hogan for the WWE Championship, his first world title in WWE, at Survivor Series, 1 year removed from his debut, Survivor Series 1991. It was a big match because Hogan was still at the top of his game at that point for the most part. Taker was on the rise. He was undefeated. And he beat him for the belt. Now, they don't show the aftermath in which Hogan beat him for the belt at Tuesday in Texas or whatever in controversial fashion, but that was what it was. Fast forward 5 years, Paul Bearer joined Mankind and turned on Taker at SummerSlam 1996. And it was not too long after that the company came up with the idea, specifically Bruce Pritchard, I believe, that came up with the idea for Taker to have a brother. And Bruce mentioned that there's no one more evil in the Bible than Cain, who was the first person to ever commit murder in the Bible, according to the Bible. And, the Cain and Abel story, they wanted to call him Cain with a different spelling, and that was how they came up with Cain the character. Now, they didn't mention it here, but I'm pretty sure as Taker has said elsewhere, and Cain himself as well, part of the reason why they settled on the name Cain was that Bruce's, I think his kid's name is Cain. Either he named him after Cain, or he already had a kid named Cain, and they named the Kane character after him. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that played a factor as well. So, on TV, Paul Bearer said Taker killed his parents and burned the house down. It was this great, drawn-out, emotional storyline, which we don't really see much of now today. And it was so over the top, but it worked. They recapped Kane's debut, and they preceded all the events kind of leading up to it, recapped all the preceding events prior to the pay-per-view. But yeah, they recap his amazing, all-time great debut of Bad Blood 1997, and how great that came off. Mick Foley says, he kind of talks about how you got to believe that you are that character, and Kane did that to a T, especially early on in his career. He added subtleties, little nuances, like turning his head like his dog. He talked about it on Broken Skull Sessions a few years ago. Glenn Jacobs, who obviously plays Kane, talks about how Kane was a psychological monster. And similar to Michael Myers, he was simple, but he was deliberate with everything that he did. And it was all about, in WWE, especially in the late 90s, it was all about the art of storytelling and telling a story and creating characters, and not so much about the wrestling or the, stuff like that, like what they would eventually turn into come the Attitude Era soon after. The story was that Taker didn't want to face his brother. He would take on all comers for the first 7 or 8 years of his career, but not his own brother, Kane. So in that meantime, Kane destroyed everyone on the roster, leading to Kane sending Taker to hell, so to speak, at the Royal Rumble in 1998 by burning him alive, and Taker wasn't inside the casket. This whole great, elaborate angle at the 98 Rumble pay-per-view. And then Taker promises that he'll feel his wrath and all this other shit. So they have that match at WrestleMania 14, their first ever one-on-one encounter. Kane's excitement when Taker was walking toward him to the ring, legit, his excitement turned to dread when he saw Taker's entrance at WrestleMania 18, or WrestleMania 14 rather, because Kane was already in the ring by the time Taker came out. So anyway, they did the match, Taker wins, but after the match, Taker gets left laying. So he was the one looking up at the lights, indicating the feud wasn't over yet. They set up a rematch for the following month, I believe at the Unforgiven pay-per-view, or whatever it was called, for the first ever Inferno match, where you had to set your opponent on fire to win the match. Just ridiculous stuff, and Taker talked about being told, like, oh yeah, you got to set yourself on fire, you got to set your opponent on fire to win the match, and this crazy shit. And they made it work, but I mean, it's still a very stupid visually it looks cool. For the performers, it's a really dumb stipulation, because a million things can go wrong. And we've had a lot of duds of Inferno matches over the years as well. Anyway, so they continued to up the ante from that point, and they talked about their transition from rivals to allies, and how no one could stop them if they ever joined together, which they did soon after, either in 98 or 99. I think it was 98, later on that year. They turned against Paul Bearer, formed the Brothers of Destruction, and Kane talked about, for as much as people wanted to see Taker and Kane against each other, that many more people wanted to see them team together as well. And they formed this indestructible partnership of evil, as he called it. They were the ultra-dominant duo, according to Taker. It was around that same time, and it had already kind of happened during the Taker and Kane feud, but they pretended like it happened after the fact. But it was around then that the Attitude Era was ushered in, and the kind of became more reality-based and stuff like that. So with the product becoming more reality-based, Taker became American Badass Taker, stuff like that. And Kane, after their partnership kind of ran its course in the early 2000s, he admits that he went as far as he did with the mask, and it was time to kind of mark a new chapter in his career. He mentioned that only he and Vince were on board with the unmasking. No one else was on board with the idea of Kane unmasking, but he felt like he could only do so much at that point in time with the mask on. And they show the unmasking. They did it in June of 2003. People talk about that they interviewed here on the show that Kane became that much scarier without the mask on. And Foley praises the face reveal that first night on Raw, and how he had the half-shaven head, and he looked ugly and all this other shit, which he looked like a normal fucking human being to me, but I could see what I could see what he's saying, though. So from that point forward, Kane became more unhinged in the months that followed, before becoming just another guy in the years that followed. But, for a while, it was special that he was unmasked before they put the mask back on him years later, which was great. And they were always changing up their characters, both Taker and Kane, the remainder of their runs in WWE. And they raised the bar together, and as opponents, they raised the bar of what was possible. Taker calls their work utter destruction, and Kane says you can't kill what won't die. And that was the note they ended on here. So, a good episode. Again, I learned absolutely nothing new. This was all the same information. 99% of this was shit I already knew, but it was enjoyable. I like the whole Brothers of Destruction storyline. They are the personification of evil, so it made sense to do an episode of WWE Evil on them. Again, I think this show is perfect to watch with anyone that isn't a hardcore wrestling fan or hasn't watched in a long time, they would find this episode specifically to be completely crazy. Because some of the storyline elements with the whole, whoa, I killed your family type shit is pretty fucking over the top, but it worked back then. It worked, and it created two characters, specifically Kane, that went on to have iconic runs in that company, which is pretty cool. But good stuff here. It clocks in at around 45 minutes. There still are 4 more episodes to go of the show I still have yet to get to. Randy Orton, Roman Reigns, Stephanie, and I forgot who the last one was. I already did The Miz, I already talked Sasha, I already talked Hollywood Hogan. There's another one. I know Stephanie's another episode. Orton is the next one, I think. Roman is the last one. And I forgot who the other one was. So I will get to all of those in the weeks ahead, so stay tuned. I will review all of them eventually. It just takes a long time because there's a lot of other stuff I still have to catch up on and review here on the channel. Thank you guys for checking out this review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Also, by hitting the bell button to be notified every time a new video goes up. And we'll be back soon with more content here on the channel. So have a great one, guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.